Juneteenth is a federal holiday. Juneteenth is a federal holiday. I gotta tell you, I did not see that coming. But I receive it, like so many of us, with deep delight and joy. You know, there are celebrations happening all over the place right now, and I love that. There are celebrations on top of celebrations on top of celebrations. We're kind of falling over ourselves celebrating. That's cool. That's good. That is right, just, and so. In fact, I guess I might say that it is meet, right, and proper. This gathering, however, takes a slightly different tone today. And we intentionally wanted to take a slightly different tone. We wanted to talk about not only freedom, but healing. And in this little time of meditation, I'm calling you to take a trip with me to the intersection of freedom and healing. A neighborhood that we delight to live in, a neighborhood that we want to see grow, a neighborhood that we want to see deepen and become more enriching. That's an address that we want to have as our address. Living at the intersection of freedom and healing. However, I have to tell you that we have to take a road to get to that intersection. And the road that I invite you to walk with me this morning, this afternoon, is the road of injury and slavery. Let me also say this. I hate talking about slavery. I don't want to think about it. I wish I could not even mention it. I wish it would just go away. It's uncomfortable. It makes me mad sometimes. It makes me want to cry. But if we're going to live at the intersection of freedom and healing, we must walk this road. Why must we? All it's going to do is make people feel victimized and guilty. But that's not the truth. Quite frankly, I'm not interested in helping us as black folks stay in victimhood. I'm interested in having us face the truth about what has happened and what is still happening. And quite frankly, I'm not interested in white guilt. I don't need it and don't want it. Nor is it any good for you. These are traps. And all they do is deepen the very divide that we have challenged ourselves to span. If I fall into my victimhood, I say, there can be no change. I'm condemned to stay nothing but a victim time after time after time after time. I deny death and resurrection as the truth of my life. To simply have people trapped in guilt? Is that really the way of Christ? Think of what we do in church week after week after week. Can you imagine if we did our confession and absolution like this? We have this confession. We tell people, all right, we want to make sure that you understand how crappy you are. And we want to make sure that you understand how terrible you are. And now after I've told you how terrible you are, I'm done. Really? Is that who we are? Is that where we want to stay and stand and live? Is that life at the intersection of freedom and healing? The truth is that there is sin to acknowledge. There is injury that is real and continues to be real. That is the truth. But let there be no mistake. God is not interested in us wallowing in either one of these traps. There's too much work to do. There's too much grace to be experienced. There's too much justice to be pursued for us to stay in that quicksand. So I walk you down this road of slavery, not to destroy you, but to have you be set free by its truth. When you stop and think about the practice of slavery itself in America, it should make you scratch your head even before you get going. Think of it this way. I got a bunch of people over here. They want to cross the Atlantic Ocean, get to a new place, because they want to experience freedom, a new start. Write all kinds of stuff about it, ready to brave all kinds of dangers for it. Yeah. Then I got a set of folks who are taken and pulled across that same ocean, brought to the same place, and told, you can't have freedom. Folks, that's not just a little contradiction. My mom would say, that's crazy talk. And I say that in no way, shape, or form to diminish the real struggles of mental illness among us, but I say that to emphasize the outstanding contradiction that it is. And now let's build on that contradiction. Let's create a practice where that becomes so prevalent, it happens so often, that people begin to think that's normal. It's like thinking that it's normal for me to walk with my feet on the top of this cathedral and hang down by the rafters. But this is what systems can do. It can lead us to think that what is wrong is somehow right. What my mom would call crazy talk is actually somehow God's good sense. But now, let's complicate it. Not only do I have a group of people enslaved, I now am saying to myself, I've come to this new country because I want to work and make myself a fortune. I want to work and have the fruits of my labor passed on to my children. But y'all over there, you don't get to do that. You get to work, but I get to have your labor. I still think that's theft. I still think that grabbing people and pulling them to someplace else, I still believe that's called kidnapping. And yet we want to say, oh yeah, that's all good and fine. But now I want to complicate it more. The slave trade supported the growth and selling of cotton. It was one of America's first international industries. Because it didn't just benefit folks here. It was sold internationally. Listen, here. So the crazy talk, as my mother would say, gets even crazier. The group that we didn't like, that we left, that one group left to come over here and leave, they've now brought another group, brought them here, forced them to do something so that this group can sell something to those folks that they don't even like. But this is the truth. I haven't even begun to talk about the literal pain, the flogging, the killing, the torturing, the maiming, and the intellectual and emotional crippling effects of slavery. And now I just want to add one more piece to the puzzle. Please bear with me as I add one more piece to the puzzle. It is not only the horrible things that slavery did, it's the things that it prevented from happening. What do I mean? Well, think of it this way. Suppose my ancestors would have come to this land, worked, had their labor respected, bought property, built homes, built churches, built schools, and had all of the same opportunities. Imagine what a country would look like. Imagine what our country would look like if indeed my own ancestors would have had those same opportunities. Can you imagine the writers that could be, whose voices never had the chance to be heard? Imagine the scholars that could have been, who never had the opportunity. Imagine the artists that could have been. Imagine the true intellectual wealth that could have been our nation. Beloved, what I'm trying to say is, we've been robbed. Slavery robbed us, not just me and my ancestors. It robbed the United States of America. It robbed the world. Can you imagine how we would look as a nation if it weren't a surprise that a black man ends up president of the United States? Can you imagine what our nation would be like if Africa was not some faraway place that nobody knew, but a place where there had always been long-standing communication? Maybe that would put a different spin on the way that America responds to black and brown people today. Maybe it would have even put a different spin on how America saw the First Nations peoples. We could have been not just a transplant of Europe, we could have been a true global community. That's what we were robbed of as a society. We were rooked. Now again, why do I take you down this story? So that everybody feels bad and looks at their shoes and said, Reverend Robinson told us we were really terrible people. No, but so that we might all face the truth. Jesus said it would set us free, not make us victims, not kill us in guilt, but that it would actually free us to move, to act, to actually bring about the change that we know is locked deep inside of us. And that's where we begin to move a little bit further toward this intersection. I tell you these things because there's a lot of untruths out there, okay? And let's just name them, shall we? Let's just name them. You know, slavery really wasn't that bad because black people got to be introduced to European ways of thinking. Lie. Lie. That is not the truth. Slavery really wasn't that bad, you know, because it really wasn't that widely practiced. Lie. That is not the truth. Slavery really only affected those people who were actually slaves, maybe the generation after that, but it's gone now. It has no impact on American life. Lie. That is not the truth. Again, why do I say this? So that we might be set free as we dig into our history and begin to tell an American story that is more like, well, that's more like the story of Jesus. One fraught with death and resurrection. Do we run away from the cross of Jesus? No. We face that pain. We look at that crucifixion, we look at that suffering, and we mine it for meaning, but we also know that that's not the end of the story. We know that's not the end of the story. Nor is slavery the end of the story. I would love to say, as I stand here today, that with Juneteenth having become a national holiday, that we have done it. We have finally erased all of the pains and wounds of slavery. If I stood up here and told you that, you should pick up those chairs and throw them at me. there is a story to be told. There is a narrative of good news that takes us to an intersection of freedom and healing. There is a narrative that you are going to hear a lot this weekend, and I suspect now that this holiday has become a national, federal holiday, you'll probably start hearing it more in the future. The narrative goes something like this. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. That is at best a huge oversimplification. It is at worst a part of the lie. I want to tell you or present to you an alternative narrative that might sound familiar to you. God brought us out of slavery with a mighty arm and an outstretched hand. If you're hearing that and scratching your head, you may think, where have I heard that? Those sound like familiar words. Where have I heard that? This is exactly what our Jewish siblings say to themselves every time Passover comes and they're talking about their liberation. They say, the Lord our God brought us out of slavery with that mighty arm and that outstretched hand. You might be willing to say, well, wait a minute, what about Moses? Didn't Moses do something? Yeah. Moses was a chosen leader of God's people, an instrument of God. Oh, by the way, Moses wasn't alone, you know. Aaron was there by his side. Miriam, who would later be called a prophet of the Most High, was there by their sides. We're also told that there were the families and the groups and the clans that were together being led. There's an incredible, huge arc of those who were involved in the work of freedom, who were also instruments of God at work, whose names have been lost in history, and whose names we do not know, and yet they are a part of the mighty arm of God that brought forth freedom. When I think of what has happened to my own kin, my own ancestors, those same words come to mind to me. God brought us out of slavery with that mighty arm and that outstretched hand. You see that same emphasis in the great song, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Was Abraham Lincoln one of the instruments of God? Yes. So also was Harriet Tubman, who was called Moses by the slaves that she led to freedom. So also was Frederick Douglass, who was called the prophet of abolitionism. So also were the countless souls whose struggle we do not know. The 16,000 plus Union soldiers who signed up to serve. The army of women who did the work of healing and fighting, and even the dangerous work of spying, going back in order to bring forth freedom. Names that we do not know, but I tell you this, not only does God know them, but the individuals whose lives they touched know them. And is this the end of God at work? Of course not. We know it's not. This is still how God works. For you see, wherever liberation is going on, that's God at work. That's God at work. Sometimes it's tough for us to see where that's happening. Maybe sometimes our own political points of view might stop us from seeing that something is going on. Maybe our own nationality might stop us sometimes from seeing what's going on. But the world continues to have the struggle for liberation. God is still at work freeing And then there's a freedom that you and I have come to know because of a man named Jesus. You and I know where we stand with God. You and I know where we stand in here with ourselves. His life, his teaching, his death, his resurrection have shown us that we are the beloved of God. No matter what's going on in our lives, we are the beloved of God. You know, my mom would say, you might not have 2 dimes to rub together, but you are the beloved of God. When I'm struggling to pay the rent, you are the beloved of God. When I'm considering where to invest my fortune, you are the beloved of God. Whether you're running a business or running from office or running away from the police who are trying to kill you, or I'm here running my mouth, we are the beloved of God, even in the most horrible of situations. That does not, cannot, will not change. Interestingly enough, a dead white guy put it pretty well in an old hymn when he said, "And take they our house, goods, fame, child, and spouse, though life itself end, they still have nothing won. God's kingdom still remains ours." But even that's not the end of the story. Because in the midst of all of the work of freedom, there are still wounds. There are still the hurts. Some of us carry wounds that we will carry to our graves. Not just the physical hurts, the emotional hurts, the times when we have been run over, thrown aside, cast away. But even so, we still look for healing. And because God is generous, we actually have some opportunities. We actually have opportunities for healing. This is one such opportunity. A time to gather, to lay our wounds before God, to say, God, I hurt. I hurt. And to have God be right there. Not just saying, I know, but God reaches out with that blood-stained hand of Jesus. I know hurt with you in the midst of it. And as that old hymn says, that trouble ain't gonna last always. And God's grace is going to be with us in the midst of hurts. This is one opportunity. There are more. There are opportunities for healing in the new friendships that we make, in the new bonds that we make. I'm sorry, folks, please bear with me. I've gone on much longer than I planned on doing, but please bear with me. I'm thinking of how I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. There were 2 kinds of folk in Cleveland, Ohio: black folk, white folk. That was it. I came to the West Coast, and suddenly I began to meet the world. And I began to hear the experiences of other people from other nations. Then I came here, to this here Diocese of Olympia, right here. And I met people whose stories I have heard. People in this room who have shared, who have taught me, told me, shared with me, revealed the wounds of Christ in their own life, so that together the healing balm might flow between us. These 2, are opportunities for healing. We have opportunities in the big places too. The big places where we see where a man who abuses his power as a police officer is finally brought to justice. We know there is so much more, but when we see these moments, they pour a little healing into us, a little more strength, a little more desire to walk in the footsteps of Christ. We find healing in places like little communities. I welcomed you this day in the name and on behalf of the African American Circle. I have found such welcome and depth and closeness in a place where I can just be me. Where I can just take that breath and say, okay, Carla, you with folk that know you. It's okay to laugh the way you laugh. It's okay to cry the way you cry. And to take comfort in a community and find some healing. Beloved, there are opportunities around us in this very room. I urge you to take them. Sometimes those big moments show up right in front of us. One of them showed up right here, where I'm standing. Just a few days ago, an opportunity to have some healing. I gotta tell you that when Bishop Greg presented these new priests to us, and I knew that one of them was that man sitting right there, Malcolm McLaren. Malcolm, stand on up. You are a sign of healing among us. Stand up. When this place erupted into applause, I wept. And the high point of my night was to kneel in front of this man of God and receive his blessing. Thank you, Malcolm, for being a sign of healing among us. Folks, I thank God for this day. Thanks be to God for you, for this day. Thanks be to God for troubling the waters and bringing us through. Thanks be to God for the balm that is in Gilead. Thanks be to God for bringing us out of Egypt land. Thanks be to God for that great getting up morning that I know is coming. Thanks be to God for this day, this Juneteenth.